Welcome. Tomorrow marks the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor by the Empire of Japan, the event that forced U.S. entry into World War II. Today, we have two fine speakers to share what their organizations are doing to help us all remember the events of December 7th, 1941, and to provide some perspective on those events. Of course, we welcome your questions. Please use the Q&A feature. Depending upon your device, the Zoom toolbar will be at either the very top or very bottom of your screen. Move your mouse there or tap your mobile device and then click or tap on the icon that says Q&A. If you don't see it, look for a ... icon that says more. Feel free to drop those questions in as you think of them. We'll answer as many as possible after both of the speakers have finished. It's my privilege today as the Military Sites Coordinator for the Texas Historical Commission to moderate this webinar and to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker will be Doreen Ravenscroft. She is the President and Executive Director of Cultural Arts of Waco, the organization that spearheaded the creation of the Doris Miller Memorial. She's been with the Cultural Arts of Waco organization for more than 17 years. Our second speaker will be General Michael Hagee, who is retired from the United States Marine Corps after 36 years, where his last post was as Commandant of the Marine Corps. General Hagee holds 2 master's degrees, one in electrical engineering and the other in strategic studies. And he is currently the President and CEO of the Admiral Nimitz Foundation. With those introductions, as brief as they are, because we want to make sure we get as much content from our presenters as possible, Ms. Ravenscroft, if you would go ahead and begin today.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm actually physically at the Doris Miller Memorial, and of course, the cold front is coming through right as we begin. But I'm very excited to be here today to help give you more information about the Doris Miller Memorial. Tomorrow we will be engaged in the ceremony. It will start at 11:55, which corresponds to Texas time. In Hawaii, it would have been 7:55. So at exactly 11:55 tomorrow, we will begin our memorial ceremony. The Doris Miller Memorial first started as a project in 2009. And Doris is a son of Waco. And even though many of you may know his name as Dory, that was a name given to him by the Navy. His family still requests us all to call him Doris, the name his mom and father gave him. As you will see in the images, you can see the actual image of Doris Miller when he was presented the Navy Cross. He was an extremely strong young man and over 6 feet tall. And the other image is actually a cartoon of the physical shooting of the aircraft from the USS West Virginia. It's really exciting to learn even more about Doris Miller and his family, and also how he came from a family of sharecroppers and how his life at home and then his experiences at home and his want to actually improve his situation made him be the young man he came to be in the Navy, even though at that time an African American could only serve in the lower decks as a messman. Today we are actually in the background, if you can see, we're still working on the Doris Miller Memorial. It's truly exciting because we have 3 new bronzes coming in. One which depicts his beginning life as a sharecropper's son. And then the second, images of his young life as a star football player for A.J. Moore High School. Something that all A.J. Moore alumni are incredibly proud of. And then the next is boxing in the U.S. Navy. And it wasn't until many sailors who had retired from the USS Miller came and told us that he was actually the champion of the Navy in his weight level. So to me, that was really exciting, and how proud they were to have actually served on the USS Miller when we met some of the retired crew. Images also show him managing the machine gun and also carrying to safety the captain of the USS West Virginia. The final new bronze that we have will be Battleship Row. And we're so proud that tomorrow we will actually have Eddie Dixon, an African-American sculptor who lives, a Texan who lives in Lubbock. He will also be with us tomorrow. I think that perhaps some of the most important things as far as our own community is concerned is how important it is to show the honor, respect, the dignity, the courage of a young man that went beyond his expectations, went beyond the expectations of himself and also the whole of the whole of the ship. I think it's the kind of image we want today for all our young people, that they can do more than expected of them. And I hope that when visiting the memorial, if you manage to get to Waco, you will see the stature of this young man. It's actually a 9-foot stature, so it's 1.5 times his actual height. But you will also understand the importance of recognizing someone who went beyond the call of duty. The memorial itself, if you can see in the background now, it actually, you can see a ship's hull. Each of those pieces, not that there's everyone for every sailor, but because it's made of many pieces of steel, represents all of those that served at Pearl Harbor, and particularly those that passed away. And the reflection pool behind me is actually for the loss of sea at Doris Miller and the crew members of the Liscombe Bay. We feel it's important that people know he continued to serve, but he also lost his life at sea. So we want this whole area to be not only a place for the celebration of life, but also a place for the reflection of life. Just some interesting facts on the steel hull. It's got over 9,000 bolts in it, and is 145 feet long, and at its highest point at the bow of the ship, it is 16 feet. So it's really and truly an impressive monument, and is actually, for those of you who are interested in mathematics, it's an algorithm. Right from the very first part of the steel, the algorithm works up to build the whole of the memorial. It was absolutely fascinating to see the segments being installed during 2017 and 2018. Doris Miller himself obviously is at the bow of the ship, and then as you can see from this picture, the reflection pool is in the background, and the whole thing looks out over the Brazos River. It's truly an impressive sight for everyone, for us all to share and for us all to remember. Do we have any questions, Stephen?
Not at this time. We'll take some at the end, should they pop in.
Okay.
Thank you, Doreen, for that. Next, we'll go from an individual sailor story to looking at the broader effect that the attacks on Pearl Harbor had on the nation. General Hagee, can you tell us more about what happened after the Pearl Harbor attacks?
Sorry,
There we go.
I'm a Marine and I forgot to push the button to turn me on. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll talk a little bit about some of the overall effects, but first I'd like to follow on what Doreen said about Doris Miller. Not only were his actions significant there at Pearl Harbor, but he had an impact much further than that. When he was recommended for the Navy Cross, the Navy, United States Navy, fought against that. And in a 2017 book by Thomas Kuter and Michael Parrish called Dorie Miller and the Birth of Civil Rights, they argue, in my opinion, successfully, that in fact he really started the civil rights movement. And obviously, as you saw from the picture that Doreen showed there, he actually received the Navy Cross. And interestingly enough, Admiral Nimitz awarded him that Navy Cross and congratulated him and indicated to him that he was truly a role model for individuals from his race and background. So it shows that an individual, through his own actions or her own actions, can actually change the course of history. Tomorrow we're going to celebrate the 80th anniversary of the attack on Pearl Harbor, and we really do it to honor those men and women who were there that day and did such heroic things under extraordinary circumstances. The Navy awarded 15 Medal of Honors that day, and I think 51 Navy Crosses, the most medals awarded for bravery in a single day. And for those 80 years, survivors of Pearl Harbor have been coming together to commemorate that event. But as everyone here knows, every year they become fewer and fewer, and shortly we are no longer going to have a personal connection to what happened on that day. I'm happy to indicate to you that tomorrow on our virtual ceremony, we will still have some of those personal connections. But I'd like to talk a little bit about maybe from a larger standpoint, what actually resulted from Pearl Harbor. We all know we went to war, but maybe a little background. You know, in the 1930s, Japan had already expanded into Manchuria, Inner Mongolia, and into China. And then, as everyone knows, or most people know, Germany actually started World War II in September of 1939. And Japan entered the war on the side of Germany and Italy in September of 1940. And then in June of 1941, Germany invaded the Soviet Union, ignoring the non-aggression pact that they had signed with that country. Both Germany and Japan had tremendous expansion success in their respective areas of operation going into the winter of 1941. What some people forget today, even though we believe that the victory in World War II was a foregone conclusion, in December of 1941, that in fact was not the opinion of the majority of people. In fact, though, in the 1930s and in the time going into December of 1941, there was a strong isolationist movement in the United States that firmly believed that the US should remain neutral, with some, and not a minority, even supporting Germany. As we know, the attack on Pearl Harbor led to the United States declaring war on Japan the next day, and thus entering World War II. And although President Roosevelt and his advisors had deliberated on whether to declare war on Germany after the attack, the president took no action because he would have faced serious opposition in Congress. Germany solved this issue by declaring war on the US on the 11th of December. Later that day, the US declared war on Germany, eliminating all meaningful domestic opposition to joining the European war. Without a doubt, the attack on Pearl Harbor not only changed our history, but the course of world history. Here at the National Museum of the Pacific War, we talk about sharing relevant lessons from World War II, especially in the Pacific, that are still relevant today. And in my opinion, Pearl Harbor is one of those particular lessons. The common legend today is that the Navy was completely unprepared for what happened on the 7th of December. And in fact, Admiral Kimmel took the blame for that, when, at least in my opinion, and I think a lot of historians' opinion, there were senior leaders in Washington that not only shared, but in fact may have helped precipitate what occurred on that particular day. Admiral Kimmel had actually exercised and done everything that he could to prepare for that particular attack. The idea that let me say, on the morning of 7 December, in the Washington Post, this is before the attack on Pearl Harbor, the Washington Post reported a Gallup poll that said 52% of the people believe that we would soon be at war with Japan. 20% said no, and another 22% around that said they had no opinion. So even the American people believed that we were going to go to war. The sharing of communication with Admiral Kimmel and General Short there in Pearl Harbor from Washington was not good, and had left, in my opinion, them unprepared. We need to think about that in my opinion, as we go forward here, even today. The other direct result of Pearl Harbor was the Presidential Executive Order 9066, which was signed on the 19th of February, 1942. And it authorized the Secretary of War and the Armed Forces to remove people of Japanese ancestry into designated military areas and surrounding communities. About 2/3 of these were American citizens, many of them born here in the United States, and who could actually not speak Japanese. There is a Supreme Court decision that came out when this case was taken all the way up. It's called the Karamatsu, after Fred Karamatsu, who was a young Japanese American that refused to report to the detention center, and the Supreme Court found that, in fact, the executive order was lawful. Wall Street Journal talked about that here a couple of days ago, calling it one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in its history. So those are particular lessons for this nation, in my opinion, directly out of Pearl Harbor. Some of the other things that occurred because of Pearl Harbor and us entering World War II was the significant socialization that took place. Before World War II, if you grew up in the South, you really didn't know too much about what was happening up in the North and vice versa. When you join the service after the bombing of Pearl Harbor there on the 7th of December, all of a sudden you were with individuals from other parts of the country, and you got to learn about other parts of the country, which had a significant effect on the socialization here. Men were signed up to serve both in the European and the Japanese and in the Pacific theater, and we had a lack of individuals in factories, and the women stepped forward. In fact, all Americans stepped forward and significantly changed their lifestyle before the war. So that's socialization, which has not been talked about a great deal. I would argue is one of the significant things that was precipitated by the attack on Pearl Harbor. Talking about the detention camps, I'd like to mention one that was actually here in Texas, down at Crystal City. This was a camp. It was for Japanese. About half were Japanese, a little more than a quarter were Germans, and there were some Italians down there. And the majority were American citizens. And this was, to my knowledge, the only detention camp that allowed families to live together. But in order for them to live together, they had to sign a document saying that if there was a prisoner exchange, either with Germany or with Japan, those individuals in that camp would be some of the individuals that would be exchanged for Americans to come back. And in fact, in a couple of instances that happened, both to Germany and to Japan, and the young individuals that went back could not even speak their respective languages. Once again, a lesson for us to think about today here, and especially for our senior leaders in Washington to think about when we face these sorts of crises. Now, this is a webinar about here in Texas, and Doreen talked about Doris Miller. I'd like to, as I wrap up here, I'd like to talk about two individuals and then a group of individuals and tell their stories. So this has to do with a couple of days after Pearl Harbor, classes had resumed at the University of Texas. And we have an oral history here where an individual said that he was in class there at UT, and the speakers on the tower were playing martial music. And he said, we were in class, and all of a sudden the music was, "You're in the Army now." And he said all the guys got up and immediately went down and signed up and joined the Army. Second story is about a young individual named Calvin Graham, who was from Crockett, Texas. To our knowledge, he is the youngest individual to sign up. He actually served in the Navy. He signed up when he was 12 years old. I've seen his picture. He does not look 12 years old, and he somehow got through the physical exam. He said that he was really concerned about the dentist passing him because he was pretty sure the dentist would recognize that he was only he was not 16 years old. He was much younger, but he did serve, and he was actually awarded a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for action on the South Dakota a couple of years after he had joined. And his mother saw his picture in the paper and outed him, and the Navy kicked him out because he joined when he was 12 years old. The last individual, Trieo Alexander, was from San Antonio, and he joined the Army when he was 14. He ended up on Corregidor in 1942 and became a Japanese POW, was actually in the POW camp there in Japan from 1942 to 1945, and was released after we dropped the atomic bombs on 1945. And he lived, he had some issues afterwards going through that horrific life that he had there in those 3 years in Japan, but he came back to San Antonio and lived until he was 88. I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, General Hagee. As significant as events were at Pearl Harbor, as significant as they were on the country, it's important that we remember that the events at Pearl Harbor affected individual lives. The National Museum of the Pacific War has numerous oral histories, as General Hagee mentioned. These recordings of individuals reflect their memory of how the attack affected them. Queuing up right now, we have a segment that will be part of the virtual program tomorrow. This isn't all of it, of course, but this is a segment of tomorrow's virtual program being offered by the Pacific War Museum. And when you're ready, Isabel, cue the video.
Just as I got out, so the quarter deck, well, I could see that guy coming. Play.
And about another 10 minutes, I'd have been going to shore. Then I heard all kind of noise. I went to the porthole, and when I looked out, the Arizona was facing me. Then I went on top side. Is when I saw that there was something going on that wasn't right. Then that plane passed just over us, and I could see him. He waved at me.
On the morning of December 7th, I was waiting on the street, waiting for my neighbor so we could walk to Sunday school at 8 o'clock. Approximately about 7:45, I heard a roar of an aircraft flying very low, which caught my attention. So immediately I looked up and I saw this aircraft banking to the left between two houses, and I had a clear view of the pilot. And automatically I just went and waved. And in some ways, I thought he acknowledged my wave by banking this way. I thought he was waving at me, and I just didn't pay attention to the plane after that.
You couldn't see nothing but smoke. There was frightening, all the bombs going off, the torpedoes going off, the ships are sinking, and people having to go ashore because the ship sunk or be picked up by tugs.
The whole ocean was getting fire. So finally, after we had saved 33 of them, they stopped us because they didn't tell us what would have happened.
Immediately after, I heard my mom yelling at me frantically, "Get in the house, come on home, get in the house."
But we was lucky. We got hit with a shrapnel bomb. We had 150 holes.
I was on the USS California We lost 104. We lost 6 officers, 98 personnel.
Later on in the afternoon, I noticed that you could smell all the burnings from the oil from the Pearl Harbor.
When the war started, I was 10 and living on the farm.
My life in Brooklyn was pretty routine.
We were all gathered around very tightly around this radio, and that's how we found out.
And the news flash came on that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
I guess from my perspective, I was too young to kind of, but I think everything was, everybody was aware of the situation and everybody was there helping. I know for a fact that my parents started having a victory garden, and since we had a big yard, we planted our own vegetables.
We worked. We had scrap drives. We rolled bandages. We did everything that we could for the war effort. We were very determined to be involved.
I remember going down with my ration books in my one pocket and a certain amount of cash in the other. And when you went into the store, the first thing they wanted to see was the ration books, because they were very careful that you weren't overusing those.
There was a lot of pride and a lot of feeling of loving our country so much that we were very grateful that we had people who would go over there and fight for us. So we knew that they were fighting for us.
Many of my neighbors who was much older than I am volunteered for the 442 or the 100th Infantry for the U.S. Army right thereafter.
And we want people to remember that those people give their lives to make sure they didn't get over here on us, the U.S.
Well, I was glad I could do it for my country.
Thank you, sir.
So again, those were segments of oral history interviews that are in the collections of the National Museum of Pacific War in Fredericksburg. Highly encourage anyone doing research on the topic of World War II to consider their archives and their collections as part of your research effort. We have had some questions come in, so I'll start working through those. I guess we'll start with Doreen. Here's a nice little sort of technical question, hopefully an easy answer. And that was, how much does that Doris Miller statue weigh, that bronze statue?
It weighs about 2,000 pounds, 2,000 to 3,000 pounds.
Wonderful. And, you know, we had this discussion before the audience joined us, but Mike Touch wants to know, what's the status of Doris Miller's surviving family? Are they involved with the memorial in Waco? What sort of interactions has the Cultural Arts had with the family?
We really started interaction with the family, actually in 2011 through distant cousins that were in Waco. And then we did a fundraiser, I believe in 2012, and two of his nieces, Flozetta Miller and Henrietta Miller Bledsoe, came to that event. And from since then, we have been close friends. And in fact, when the Navy was about to make the announcement for the aircraft carrier, they actually called us because they had no way of contacting any of the Miller family. So I actually kept a secret for 3 weeks that there was going to be an aircraft carrier named after Doris Miller. So it was so exciting to know the family in that time.
That's a wonderful and interesting story. For those that may not be aware, the next ship in the Ford class, CVN 81, was the one designated in Doris Miller's name. I noticed earlier in August, they actually had the steel cutting ceremony, which is the first beginning of work actually on the ship, though it's not due to be laid down and put together for a little bit longer, a few more years. Work has already started on the Doris Miller.
Yes, it has.
Um,
The family was there. They were invited, and in actual fact, it's actually on YouTube. If everyone wants to research it, you can actually see the signing of the first cut.
Wonderful. General Hagee, I think this one's probably more in your line. This comes from Skipper Steely. Says he's written 3 books on Admiral J.O. Richardson of Paris, Texas, and one is huge in telling why we were at Pearl Harbor. Richardson's wife and Walter Short's wife were first cousins, also from Paris. So he takes a keen interest in the saga. He notes that he's worked with the late Tom Kimmel in the effort to regain Short and Kimmel's ranks, which were diminished after the attacks. 9 others regained theirs, as was demanded by Congress, but not Kimmel or Short. 3 of the 9 had their ranks returned and had been fired by Eisenhower. What do you think are the chances of Congress reinstalling the ranks of Kimmel or Short?
Thanks for that question. I think it's really a very important question. I personally, not that anyone cares, I personally support that initiative. I saw the family. I never talked with them. I was in Washington when they came up and talked with Senator Warner, who at that time was head of the Armed Services Committee. I really don't know. I think a fair reading of history, as I tried to say in my short remarks, Kimmel and General Short actually did everything that they could. I think sometimes we forget how the divide between victory and defeat is very narrow when you go up against a very, very good opponent. Admiral Kimmel and General Short did everything they could with the information they had, and not all that information was shared with them, as I talked about. And actually, the primary individual responsible for the success on the attack on Pearl Harbor was Admiral Yamamoto. His plan was not perfect, but he is the one that precipitated that attack. And one thing I think that we should keep in mind when we're talking about Admiral Kimmel is every single attack by carrier-based air in the Pacific, whether it was Japanese, American, or British, almost always a surprise. So it's unfortunate, but unfortunately, based on it, how much time has passed, I think it's going to be difficult, probably. Oh, Stephen, if I could, you in that last segment, thank you for showing that. J.C. Alston led it off, a Pearl Harbor survivor. And actually, about 10 days ago, he lived here in Fredericksburg. Past tense, he passed away. And tomorrow, around noon on Pearl Harbor Day, we're going to have a memorial in front of our memorial wall here at the museum.
How very appropriate. We have another question here that I think probably is more for Doreen, but both of you might chime in based on your experience and observations. Andy Jackson notes that Austin had a Doris Miller auditorium. I was wondering if other cities honored him in other ways, or did Austin have some type of special relationship with him?
I believe Austin had any special relationship with Doris Miller, but what I believe was the importance of showing community how much they wanted to honor the memory of Doris Miller. We have a school that no longer exists in Waco, but was the Doris Miller Elementary School. It's also why. And I think in many cities there is often a building, particularly a public building, named after Doris Miller. And I hope often it's one for young people that like the why, because I think it's really presenting even further and showing even further how important it is to honor a young person as well as the senior military in the United States. And to honor him for what he did. I think a lot of people throughout the country felt that his name needed to be used to honor one of their buildings. So I don't, to my understanding, Austin had no particular connection with the family.
General Hagee, are you aware of any other cities that have honored Doris Miller?
No, I'm not.
You know, one thing I failed to mention when we were talking about the upcoming USS Doris Miller is that not only is this the first aircraft carrier or capital ship to honor an African American, it's also the first one to honor an enlisted serviceman, which is, you know, significant in the Navy's history. All right, moving on down to some other questions here. Probably General Hagee, why did Japan attack our fleet, and what were they trying to accomplish through that attack?
I believe especially Admiral Yamamoto, if not the majority, knew that or believed that Japan could not win a long war. There have been some individuals who argue that because we cut off their oil to them, that they attacked us for that. That's probably a partial reason, but from a military standpoint, Japan, once again, especially Admiral Yamamoto, was concerned that they could not win a long war, and what he was hoping to do was to make the losses so severe that we would negotiate for a settlement and essentially leave the Pacific to them. And after the attack on Pearl Harbor, of course, we all know that in June of 1942, Midway occurred. And actually what Japan was trying to do there was take Midway with the idea of possibly taking Hawaii and holding that island hostage to force the United States to negotiate. Unfortunately, or fortunately for us, unintended consequences with the attack on Pearl Harbor, as I said in my remarks, assured that both Japan and ultimately Germany, with Hitler deciding to declare war on us, would lose the war.
All right. We have a follow-up question for General Hagee from Skipper Steely, and that is, it still amazes him that the public blamed those two men, blamed Admiral Kimmel and General Short in 1941, but that doesn't appear to be public opinion in 2001. Why is that? What's responsible for the shift in public opinion over that period of time?
Well, I think there have been some really very good historical books with good research that in fact shows that, as I mentioned before, Admiral Kimmel did everything he could within his resources and information he had to prepare the Navy if the attack came there in Hawaii. I think it was common knowledge, or most people believe, that the Japanese would attack somewhere, but there were conflicting intelligence interpretations on where that might happen. Another thing that Admiral Kimmel did that probably saved the fleet, he had two options. One, he could have put the fleet at sea, or he could have kept it in there in Hawaii. And two of the carriers were gone on a national mission, actually taking aircraft that were needed for the defense of Hawaii to Midway and to Wake. If you read what Admiral Nimitz said later on, he said actually Admiral Kimmel saved the fleet by keeping them there in Pearl Harbor. If he would have put them to sea, the Japanese had overwhelming power. And if they'd have sunk those carriers and the other ships at sea, we could have not repaired them. They would have been gone, and the loss of life would have been significantly larger. So his two bad choices, he made the best of the two bad choices. So I think the reason that the American public support the Admiral Kimmel being promoted to 4-star is because of those histories. Interestingly enough, as I'm sure the questioner knows, Admiral Nimitz, Franklin Roosevelt wanted Admiral Nimitz to actually go out to Pearl Harbor, and he refused, and Kimmel is the one that actually ended up going out there. And the reason that Nimitz refused is he said, I'm too young and it would hurt the Navy. And then after Admiral Kimmel was relieved, in an interview, Admiral Nimitz said, you know, if I would have gone, the exact same thing would have happened.
Wonderful, wonderful insight there. Question for Doreen. Kristen Nolan mentioned that she had recently visited the Doris Miller Memorial. I was wondering what is planned for the area shaped like a ship that looks like a planting bed. Will sculptures be placed there or other plantings? So what are the intentions for that space?
That space is actually very exciting. That's physically what's happening behind me at the moment. The 3 bronzes that were delayed because of COVID are actually being installed, and they are the storytelling, the educational side of this memorial. So we are hoping that when families and children come, they will actually see these relief bronzes that can tell the story before Doris Miller entered the United States Navy and then while he was in the Navy. So that the planter is actually physically now receiving those bronzes, which the public will see for the first time tomorrow. Also a new, the bronze Navy Cross has also arrived, and it's been placed at the bow of the ship planter.
Wonderful. Sounds like a great opportunity tomorrow to see these new sculptures. General Hagee,
they are absolutely amazing.
Wonderful. General Hagee, I've got a question from a graduate student at Lamar that just did an oral history on the last surviving Mexican American who served in World War II in Southeast Texas, and is wondering how they might get their oral history preserved at your museum. How does one go about, who should they contact for that? You're on mute there, General.
Sorry about that. If they would call in here to the National Museum of the Pacific War at 830-997-8600, extension 400, and ask to be connected to the collections department, either Reagan Grau or Chris McDougall, we can take care of that.
Wonderful. Have a question here about the Marines at Pearl Harbor specifically. What type of casualties did members of the Marine Corps at Pearl see during the attack?
Thank you for that question. I don't remember the exact numbers, 100, 200, somewhere around there. Most of the ships there at Pearl Harbor were battleships, and they all had Marine detachments on board. In fact, about in 2004 or 2005, a memorial was put up there at Pearl Harbor for those Marines who gave their lives on that morning.
All right. Also for General Hagee, Michael Sweeney asks, where did the Japanese aircraft carrier fleet go after it attacked Pearl Harbor? Where did the Japanese fleet retire to after the attack?
I'm sorry, I do not know.
That should be fairly easy to research out there.
Yeah.
So, all right. Diane Dowdy has an observation that the mess hall at Chase Field in South Texas, which was a Navy pilot training base, was also named for Doris Miller, and there was a plaque there that told his story. She noticed it when stationed there in the 1970s. All right. At this point in time, unless anybody drops in a final question, that appears to be all the questions we have for our presenters. I have a final question. I know both of you have events tomorrow. Doreen, you mentioned it in your presentation, but I know we had some folks who were kind of tuning in and having audio difficulties earlier. Would you like to, mention any last minute notes about what you have going on tomorrow there in Waco?
Which is on Martin Luther King Boulevard. We will be having a memorial service to honor those who passed during Pearl Harbor.
Doreen, the wind is winning.
The wind is winning over me. Oh dear.
Oh, now we can hear you. Now we can hear you.
Okay. The ceremony tomorrow will be at 11:55. Doris Miller Memorial, in Waco, Texas. We hope as many people as possible can join us.
Okay. General Hagee, you guys have a virtual event tomorrow. Would you like to speak more about how people might attend or participate in that?
Yes, we, as you said, Stephen, our commemoration day tomorrow is virtual. If you go to pacificwarmuseum.org, you can sign up. Like here, there is no cost. We love to have individuals. We've got well over 100 individuals signed up right now to participate tomorrow. And like with Doreen, it'll start at 11:55. You'll get all the information there on our website, because that is the exact time corresponding with the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941.
All right, wonderful. All right, that concludes our program today. I want to thank our speakers and all of you who joined us. Be sure to watch for more programs from the Texas Historical Commission by checking our website, social media, and subscribing to our email newsletter. Have a great day, and tomorrow, be sure to remember Pearl Harbor.